Okay.
Nancy Belanger. I'm also on the Board of Selectmen in Exeter, and I'm also interested in the downshifting of our state budget, the results of that.
Donna, our rep veteran here.
Oh, I'm Donna Schlackman. I spent 6 years in the House, and I guess because I'm out of it now, I am wondering about the conversations about revenue sources. This is more for Patty, I guess, because I heard a lot this year about we have to live within our means from those who are creating the budget on the House side. And since we create the means as a state by which the state budget is developed, I would like to hear what the conversations were, maybe on the inside, about those means. Because the budget that came out is so depraved. Is that, can I use that?
Yeah.
How are we going to answer these?
Well, as we go through, and we'll come back at the end.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're. Pat?
Introduce yourself. Do you have any?
Oh, I don't have any particular questions.
Okay.
Yeah,
And you are Pat Yasha.
yeah,
Okay.
but I'm not, I
Okay.
don't hold any public
No, no, we're
office.
just introducing.
Oh, I
everybody.
see, all right, yeah.
I'm Lou Hitzroth. I'm a longtime Exeter resident. I'm here primarily because my wife Renee can't be here. Her father is quite ill, but she's particularly concerned about the drastic cut in the renewable energy fund,
Okay.
or the proposed drastic cut.
I'm David Weber. I've lived here since 1970 and have been paying ambivalent attention to these kinds of issues for the last several years. This morning I went to a meeting where Speaker Jasper did Q&A with people from the New Hampshire Center for Nonprofits, and gave me a strong sense, first of all, that there's some real division in the nominal Republicans between libertarians and fiscal conservatives. He spoke with some feeling on that point. I was sort of, I mean, I guess it shouldn't be news to anybody, but I was a little surprised that he was coming from exactly where he was. But he's very much on the page that Donna was talking about living within our means. He's not on the page of thinking about how the means get created. And he claimed that our current tax system ensures fiscal discipline and that it isn't too bad, and that you can see that because there's been an expansion in the overall, the sort of the number that you would get if you added all these columns up. At the bottom, he claimed the next biennium's numbers cumulatively are substantially larger and that we should feel okay about that. In other words, that's his way of saying we don't have a revenue problem. I think we have a revenue problem.
Dave, what's the piece of paper you're referring to?
It's the.
Susan Almey's chart.
Just Simpson-Enviro, okay. We have that. Yeah.
Well, I'm Anthony Zwan, I go by Ton, but I'm just here to get educated. I don't have any particular concern.
My name's Don Tilbury, I'm from Hampton, and my main concern is on the Renewable Energy Fund. I heard they were gonna reduce that, and I came to see what the discussion would be on that.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Don Clement, I'm just here to absorb information, and also because it's a beautiful night out.
Okay, Lisa?
Lisa Butler, I'm just a citizen. I paid adequate attention and I saw the notes.
Oh, good. Thanks for coming. Now, Ilsa, did you want to, now that you're relieved of your responsibilities, would you introduce yourself and just give us, if there's any particular question that's burning on your brain at this point?
Oh, thank you. I'm Ilsa Andrews from Exeter, and I'm just here to get educated.
Okay. And then we have Eric from the
Exeter newsletter.
And then we will kind of get into some of these questions and other questions which will probably come up as a result of what we're going to be talking about.
Hi. I'd like to give you a sort of a quick overview about how we go about putting together the budget. It's a multi-layered process, and quite a bit of it is very repetitive. We do the same thing, several groups do the same thing, one right after the other. We do a 2-year budget. It's a biennium budget, and it always starts as of July. Our fiscal year starts on July 1st. So the first year of the biennium, which is what we're in now, we write the budget, and it starts as of July 1st. The first one to take a crack at the budget is the governor. The governor in the fall is starting to put together the budget for the year that's going to start, the 2-year period that's going to start the next July. What the governor has done for the last couple of bienniums is she has a revenue estimating panel that helps her come up with what the revenues are. They meet with economists, demographers, people that know about where the state is going, how it's compared to the rest of New England, the rest of the country. They meet with, first on the revenue side, they meet with the department heads, commissioners from each of the various revenue areas, whether it be lottery, DRA, which is the Department of Revenue Administration, for all of the business taxes, interest and dividends, rooms and meals, et cetera. So they meet with each of the department heads, come up with what they expect the revenue is going to be. So you need to start with the revenue. We have to have a balanced budget. Then the governor meets, and her panel will meet with each of the department heads to come up with the expenditure side of it. HHS, Health and Human Services, is the biggest piece of our budget, but they will meet with every department head that that requires expenditures, the appropriations side of the budget, and then make some tough decisions based upon what the revenue is estimated to be. And many times the governor may put in new sources of revenue. This time, I think she put in 20 cents or 30 cents. I think it was 30 cents additional on our cigarette tax. So the governor put some additional revenue into the budget. At a 30-cent increase per pack, we would still be more than $1 less than Massachusetts. We would still be the lowest or tied for the lowest in New England. So the governor has to present the budget to the House it's mid-February. I think it's by February 15th. I don't remember the exact date, but it's basically by mid-February. So the governor will present her budget, what she sees as the priorities of the state, and whatever new sources of revenues that she or he may have at that time. The House goes through the same exact process. Ways and Means, which is a committee that I've been on, my second term on Ways and Means, we do the revenue side of the budget. And we go through the same exact process that the governor's group did. We meet with economists, demographers, et cetera. We meet with the heads of every department. But we are not looking for new sources of revenue. We are coming up with, based upon the laws as they exist, what do we expect the revenues to be? This year we were doing that in January, the very early part of February, because the head of Ways and Means wanted to give out our revenue estimates prior to the governor's, which is earlier than what we normally did it. So we were doing it using information only through January. And January is a low income month. So we had obviously the past few years and then January. So we did our revenue estimates, which we then pass over to Finance. Finance is the committee that deals with the appropriation side of the budget. They divide themselves up into 3 groups. One group does everything to do with HHS, Health and Human Services. Another division deals with anything to do with education, whether it's higher education, whatever, transportation, safety, fish and game, and lottery, I think it is. And then the 3rd division takes everything else. And they go through the same process of meeting with the department heads. The department heads are saying, this is what we want to see in our budget. And these are the reasons that we want to see it. To give you an example, like Health and Human Services, they deal with the developmental disabled. So these are people who are beyond the age of 21, or are 21 or older, who may need services. All of those students that go through our schools, who have special ed, who may have some very significant special ed needs, the schools are responsible for them until they turn 21. After they turn 21, then the school systems are no longer responsible for them. And it's now back to their families, or what can the state do for programs to help them. In some cases, if there aren't any supports that the families can get, sometimes you have parents who can no longer work because they now have to be taking care of their adult children. In this budget, to give you an example, you'll hear the Republicans saying, well, it's basically the same amount of money as we had last term. And then the Democrats will say there's this huge cut to it. The cut that we're talking about is the cut from the governor's budget. But we know of, within the next 2 years, there's about 800 people that are going to come come out of the school systems. And it's not like they're a surprise to us because they're in our schools. We know the identification of these 800 people who are going to turn 21, and without some state assistances, there's going to be an incredible burden on their families. So anyway, I kind of got off topic. I didn't want to talk about specific issues right now. So the House goes through and comes up with this budget. Ways and Means normally would go back after we've got another month or so of revenue and reproject revenue. We were not allowed to do that this year. The head of finance did not want us to, so we went with our original estimates.
Before you go further,
Yes.
Can I ask, is there some rational, logical explanation for the head of finance not allowing that to go forward?
You'd have to ask him that. I don't think he wanted any additional revenue. And that's my guess.
Well, he said as much.
He did say as much.
Pretty transparent.
So a lot of things happen.
He wanted a lowball revenue.
He wanted a lowball revenue. A lot of things happen behind the doors. And the Democrats on the committee didn't know what the budget was going to be until it actually came out. In past years, they go through the budget page by page, and they have these huge notebooks and go through page by page. This year, they didn't crack the books. A lot of it was done. It was done much differently this year than it's been done in the past. So then they had to buy votes. There were things that were going to be in the budget that didn't end up being in the budget. There were changes to some of the adequacy formulas that didn't end up happening. And so the head of finance needs to get enough votes so that it'll pass on the floor. And generally the party in power can always pass a budget. One of the things that was talked about with the speaker being very frank apparently at a meeting earlier, the Republicans they have several very distinct factions, which makes it very difficult for the Republicans sometimes even to pass a budget. There was a concern that we weren't going to end up passing a budget. They do have the Libertarians, and they have the Free Staters, and the Tea Party, so they have a lot of different factions within theirs. But anyway, the House passes this budget. It goes to the Senate. The Senate is in the process of doing the exact same thing on revenues and expenses. They did have a meeting today, I think a preliminary presentation of the budget this afternoon. It was in Reps Hall. I was at UNH for the hallway competition, so I don't know what the first crack of the budget is. But the Senate will come up with their budget, they'll pass a budget, and then there will be this committee conference that will happen near the last week of June. And the two parties will spend a week haggling over little bits. Very little will happen in public. It'll all happen in the rooms behind, and then they'll come forward, talk a little bit, and then break. And on the last day, at about 3 o'clock in the morning, they will come to an agreement. It never happens at 10 o'clock at night. It's, you know, I think it was just about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning last time I was an alternate on the committee conference. And then that budget will get brought forward. When the Senate does it, they have better revenue estimates. Because now we've been through March, and they won't pass their budget until sometime near the end of May. So they will have March, which is a big month, April, and even half of May. When we did our revenue estimates, like I said, we only had January. The day after the House voted on the budget, then House Ways and Means went in and looked at our revenue estimates again, based upon having February's numbers and more than half of March. And March 15th is a big deal. And we significantly increased our revenue estimates. Yes?
Federal funds just folded in here indistinguishably from funds raised by taxation?
The numbers that you're looking there are just what gets raised from the state. The state, the general fund is a little over $2 billion. When they talk about, you know, a $10, $12 billion budget, the difference is federal funds. More than half of every dollar that's spent in HHS, Health and Human Services, comes from the federal government. We do get a lot of federal funds. We get federal funds for our roads. We get a lot of federal funds for, like I said, programs such as that go through HHS. It did seem to me this time, and it was actually said in a presentation that was done, that they were really looking to cut programs where we got federal funds. So there are programs. I think Meals on Wheels is a dollar for dollar match. So if you cut $20 million out of there, you've cut $40 million out of it. We did ask the head of the budget office how much we left on the table for those kinds of programs, and he said $67 million.
That's conservative.
Yes.
Because this is being televised, could you clarify, when you were talking about the committee of conference process
Yes.
where the House and the Senate get together to
Yep.
reconcile their two budgets, you said a lot of this happens in the back room where the two parties go off. You were talking about Republicans caucusing Senate and House and Democrats caucusing Senate and House. Correct? Because I was hearing you say there's a lot happening.
There is a lot happening
in public, and
there's a lot of negotiations between the parties that happens outside of that room. And then you come back.
How is that legal?
Yeah,
Because
I think that's what you're asking then, is how that's legal.
how is that legal?
Because it's not the full committees that are meeting.
it's actually doesn't seem legal under the right to know laws,
Right.
but there's a very specific court case where it was challenged. And even though it seems like it's not legal, it does, because of that court case, it is legal.
So, I mean, the Dems and the Republicans, the Dems caucus separately, the Republicans caucus
That's
separately. Yes, but the head Democrat and the head Republican will be talking to each other and say, how about if we did such and such, would you give on this? And they go back and talk to their caucus and they talk. So by the time you get back into the room.
Right. Oh, that's fine. That's one-on-one. I just wanted to.
It is not the full committees whatsoever. I mean, I was on that committee last year, and it's the heads of the committees. So, I mean, there's obviously some horse trading. Last term was probably the first time in 20, 30 years that there was a bipartisan budget. The entire Senate voted for it, and the majority of the House voted for it. So once this committee conference comes up with a budget, it then goes back to the House and it goes back to the Senate, and each one needs to pass it by a majority of at least one. And then it goes to the governor can choose to sign it or not. And I think the last time it wasn't signed, I think, Donna, didn't Benson not sign the budget?
That was before my time.
Okay, I think the last time that a governor didn't sign it was, and then it's everybody needs to go back and work on it. They can do a continuing resolution. But that's, in a nutshell, that's the process. overall that we go forward. Some of the other things, I talked about some of the individuals, and there are some items up here that I know quite a bit about, if you want to get to it later.
Can I ask one quick question?
Yes.
Just looking at these numbers, if you look at FY 2016 for the governor and for the House,
Yes.
the discrepancies between the two are about $100 million. I'm trying to figure out how, if they both have similar revenue estimates, how they can be so far apart.
The governor's revenue estimates in some cases were higher.
$100 million?
She also had, she had some increases in car registration. She had, I think, 30 cents on the cigarette tax.
Didn't she, something in the gas tax, didn't she raise the gas tax?
No.
No, I don't think she, no, she
Vehicle
didn't, it was vehicle registration. So, and she may have had more optimistic. The committee, that Ways and Means, was assuming that we were going to be starting from almost a $50 million hole in this biennium. We are now projecting that we will end the year level. So they're not starting with a $50 million hole. So
But that suggests they have.
much better revenue
Yeah, well,
estimate. So what comes out of the Senate should not look as bleak as what came out of the House.
Did the governor factor in income from casino or
No.
not? So her proposed budget did not factor that?
No, but she did have Keno in there. She did factor Keno, which I think was about $25 to $30 million.
Which also didn't pass, or?
I don't, that was actually in the House budget.
It was an
It's in the House budget. But whether or not it'll go through in the Senate. 2 years ago, the budget prior to that, the governor had put $80 million of a licensing fee into the budget, and obviously.
Which obviously didn't pan out.
It didn't pan out, and last week, I will tell you right now, I'm a very anti-casino person, and I spoke on the floor about it many times. The House once again killed the idea of a casino, and this time by a really large margin.
I noticed that.
Yes, it was a nice day. Anyway, I will let my patriots talk about some individual.
I will say, as a backbencher, we just don't know anywhere near as much, most of us don't know anywhere near as much as people like Patty, who's on the Ways and Means, and other people who are on the Finance Committee. The governor came in January or February. She presented a budget. It balanced. She had 2 or 3 modest income, revenue increases. But the Republicans said, I mean, as I heard the debate on the budget in the House, the chair of the Finance Committee said, we have to live within our means. We're not going to raise any revenues. The Speaker of the House has told our minority leader there are X number of Republican members of the House, something on the order of 160, who promised the Koch brothers that they will raise no taxes and no fees. Anyway, I'm mystified that the budget that the House did pass, which was passed by the Republican majority, there's just such a huge disparity between that and the budget that the governor proposed. But however it happened, it did happen, and Patty certainly added a lot to what the later process is all about. I'm going to speak about just a few of these spending cuts that were made in the House, the budget approved by the House. And when I say cuts, they're not all cuts from what we had last year, that is the past 2, not the previous biennium. These are cuts from what the governor proposed. And the first is elderly services, and the 3 categories here. Social services block grant, I'm not sure what that is. Grants to locals, something about the aging, and then something called Service Link, which is a program whereby people who have, old people are saying, you know, I'm going to need, or we have somebody in the family and we don't know what kind of, where can we get the kind of services we need? And this was a program where you could go to them and they would give you good counseling and direct you to the kinds of agencies that could help you out.
I think I'm right in saying that block grants are basically the money that's given to the community action programs to fund WIC, Head Start, family daycare, fuel assistance, breastfeeding connection, literacy programs, all of those programs.
The community health, like Lamprey Health Center, that sort of thing.
Thank you. Wendy.
So you mentioned the House was cutting the governor's proposed budget, but in fact, it looks for this, that they're really cutting the current budget.
Yes, they are. This is a case where they're cutting both. Some, as Frank said, being an accountant, I have a problem even with how the Democrats talk about the budget. I have a big problem. Because the Democrats will talk about cuts, and they're talking about cuts from the governor's budget. Well, that budget has never been accepted. That was, to me, if you're talking about cuts, it should be cuts from the last budget. You may not be putting enough into the budget to deal with the new issues. I mean, there are things that we cut that we've agreed to either in contracts or in legal settlements. And, you know, we've said that we will do X amount as part of our mental health, the settlement. And some of those things that we said we would do were taken out of this budget. To me, that can completely open up the can of worms. We could be back into lawsuit again. I mean, another thing that we agreed to, you know, the state employees, we negotiated a contract with them, and there are raises in the contract. They hadn't had raises for a while. And this budget says, oh, we'll agree to everything else in the contract, but we're not going to give them we're not going to fund the raises. So there are things that we've agreed to in contracts that have now been taken out of the budget.
The long and short on the elderly services is that the cuts are either 25 million or 22 million, which is approximately 50%. Big cut. On addiction services, there's a reduction in services to 1,200 people over the 2 years. There's a $6 million cut in the alcohol and drug abuse prevention services. In addition, the House-passed Republican budget eliminates substance abuse disorder benefit for Medicaid clients.
You did say billion, didn't you? It's billion, not
no,
million.
No, I did not say billion.
It's
no.
million.
Million.
Okay.
I may have said billion, but
okay, million. Okay.
I beg your pardon.
And that's only for the people who were on Medicaid, not the expanded Medicaid. Anybody who got Medicaid through the expanded Medicaid, which this budget does away with starting in 2017, those people do get mental health services. But anybody who was already on our existing Medicaid program does not have mental health services. And the governor's budget had put in, meant to have a parity. So if you're on Medicaid, whether you were on the old Medicaid or you're on the expanded Medicaid, that both groups would have access to mental health services. The budget that was passed by the House eliminates that benefit for the people who were already on Medicaid, not the expanded Medicaid.
Patty did talk about developmental disability services, and there's cuts there of either $52 million or $54 million. The information that's been provided doesn't all go together perfectly, but that's a big cut, $50-some billion. In the mental health services budget, there's going to be delays by 1 year of the opening of a 10-bed crisis unit at the New Hampshire hospital. Now, there's a current waiting list already, which includes 40 adults and children waiting in emergency rooms right now. Now, I do ask,
this occurs to be, okay, let's say we got the 10 beds immediately, would that take care of all those 40 people?
Well, it wouldn't take care of the children, that's for sure.
Okay, yeah,
And that's on any given day. Some days we may only have,
yeah.
10 people in waiting rooms. But think of, if you've ever been around somebody that's having a mental health crisis, and they're brought to an emergency room, and the hospitals can't deal with them, they need to go to the New Hampshire hospital, and they have to wait 5 days. If I waited 5 days in the emergency room for anything, I'd be having a mental health crisis. Never mind if I went in there with a mental health crisis. So, you're right, 10 beds will not cure the problem, but it'll make a big difference to 10 people every day.
Higher education cuts, 4 years ago, there were big steep cuts. 2 years ago, they got restored largely, or to a degree, a significant degree. But in the House budget, it did get passed. There's a $28 million cut for the university system, and also a cut for the community college system. And my sources show that's either $3 million, $5.2 million, or $7.7 million. I'm not sure which.
It depends upon whether you're talking from last time.
Okay.
And we are down to, I forgot the year, but I think we're around the same funding that we did around the year 2000 or so. And to put higher education in perspective, if you look at what New Hampshire spends on a per capita basis, we are 50th in the nation. If we double what we spend, we are still 50th. Not something to be proud of. We haven't caught Colorado yet, even if we doubled if we triple it, we would. But if we double what we spend on higher education, we are still 50th on a per capita basis.
Okay.
Come on, you gotta have some good news for us.
Yeah, the good news is that for emergency shelters, there's only a $4 million cut. These are shelters for the homeless, veterans, and domestic violence victims. And those are the points that I was asked to cover, and thank you very much.
Frank, when you say $4 million cut, you're talking cumulatively over the 2 years?
Yes,
then?
biennial cut.
Yeah.
Biannual, got it.
That's
2
correct.
million each
The
year.
2 years, you add
Yeah,
up
I
to
can't
2
be
years.
skipping at the flip sheet.
Okay.
Your sheet that the emergency shelter cut is only $4 million, but that is a 50% cut, it looks like to me. So it's pretty significant, even though the number is smaller than what we've been talking about before that. So my slide is entitled Revenue Manipulation. So in order to make the budget balance based on the revenues that the Ways and Means Committee came up with, there had to be some manipulation of money. And I guess to start with, we have the general fund, which is money that comes in that's not designated for a specific purpose, and then designated funds, so money that comes in a particular way for a particular use. And so some of the revenue manipulation comes from the House choosing to take money out of designated funds to use for purposes for which it was not designated. And those of you who are concerned about the Renewable Energy Fund, that's exactly what has happened in the House budget there. But first, this is not good news at all, but it's a funny story. So we'll start with that. We have $10 million roughly in a rainy day fund. We should have more to be fiscally responsible. We should have a larger rainy day fund, according to Wall Street investors, which is one of the reasons for having a rainy day fund, is so that we can have a good credit rating, a good score, so that we'll be able to be lent money. And that people will buy our bonds. So we are building a rainy day fund. It has money in it. It's supposed to stay there for a rainy day. And at the last minute, the finance committee decided that they needed to take the money out of the rainy day fund, bringing it down basically to zero, in order to fix some problems that they had created by taking education money out of the budget. That the finance committee had chosen to change the education funding from the governor's budget such that it angered a lot of representatives and their constituents. So there was not, it was going to be a really ugly mess if some money wasn't found to fix the education budget. So one of the places that the finance committee went was to the rainy day fund. But the chair of the finance committee stood up in front of all of us and said, we need this $10 million from the rainy day fund, and we need to take it and put it somewhere else. But when we go to committee of conference, I'm going to make sure that we get the $10 million back into the rainy day fund when we meet with the Senate. So that money may go back, yeah, after.
If I could just get a clarification.
Yeah.
So the items, the dollar amounts that you're running on the rainy day fund balance across this sheet, is that the actual balance, or is that how much you're putting into the fund?
That's the, where it says current biennium.
Right. That's our current balance.
We have around, it's between 9 and 10 million in there. What happens
That
is...
you're putting in, or that
No,
we-
that's there right now. At the end of any year, if there's a surplus that goes, it's going into the rainy day fund, and then...
So it is literally the balance in the fund?
Yes, they are eliminating the balance in the fund.
2017, so a hundreds of millions of dollar budget, and that's all we have for a reserve?
Yeah, that's our savings account.
Okay.
That's all we used to have.
And now they're talking in 2017 about stripping it to zero?
Yes.
Well, Donna's shaking her head.
It's your house savings,
Well, now, hang on, because Donna's saying there was 70 million.
In the prior to 2008, there was like $70 million in the rainy day fund.
I think it was
for the
before that.
state.
Yeah, when we went through the recession, we did pull money out.
It was a rainy day?
It was a rainy day. And, the things that she's talking about taking money out of the renewable energy fund, I mean, to be completely fair, money has been taken.
Let's just stay on the rainy day here for a second, because it's shocking.
This is
to
a
me.
different, yeah, this is really a
We have a
different
much smaller budget in the
conversation.
town of Exeter, and, in comparison,
Yeah.
our percentage of
Yeah.
our reserve is much higher.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, this is
Yeah.
just shocking to me,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Oh, we're gonna take care of
I'm a neophyte and a virgin at this, and I'm shocked.
Yes, 12 million.
I'm shocked that there's gambling going on in this society.
That would be like you having in your home, your own personal finances, having $100 in your savings account.
Even if they weren't stripping it to nothing, it's nothing.
Yes.
In comparison to the
Donna?
Correct,
the
right.
operation.
Donna, you have a comment?
Well, having spent 6 years there and having people always say, we need to run the state such and such a way, if you were budgeting at home, you would be living within your means. You have an income, you have a job, you live within your means. That's the way we do it. But I'm sitting here listening to you and I'm going, what a yo-yo. If anybody's home income did the spikes in certain categories and the up and down, some days you'd be eating and some days you wouldn't. Some days you'd have shoes for your kids to go to school and some days you wouldn't. Some days you'd pay your heating bill and some days you wouldn't. I mean, it's so bizarre.
Well,
It is so incredibly
It goes
bizarre.
further than that, because no household would only tend to the expense side of the ledger. They would also look at the revenue side of the ledger and they say, we need more income.
Right.
This is crazy.
Well, it is, but this is the world in which the House is living, because they are saying, no more revenues, and we're just gonna strip it down. So there is no food in the refrigerator, so there...
Right, but so the second part, and Dan, thank you for jumping in because you're absolutely right, but the second part is, at what point, and this is a loaded question, do the leaders of this state sit down and talk about policy? What is our policy as a state? Is our policy as a state to forget about those kids who are suspected of being abused and neglected and not worry about their condition and their medical? Is that the policy and the values of this state? Is the value of our state to forget about renewable energy? Is that what we're about? That doesn't happen in this process at all. Nobody starts with, you know, we hear it in the media all the time, value-based, value-based, value-based. There's no value base built into this budget process. And I think the people in the state need to understand that we're so concerned about living within our means that we never figure out what are the values we have, and as Dan just said, and what revenues do we need in order to sustain our state in a way that consistently allows us to set forth policy and follow through with it. It's bizarre.
If I could continue, as a business owner, if I only looked at the expense side and I never attended to the revenue side, I wouldn't be in business. I literally wouldn't be in business.
Sure.
Because if you're only looking to cut costs and you're never looking to invest, you eat your seed corn, you eat your capital, and you're done. You're out of business. And I literally think that is their goal, is to put the state government out of business.
To a degree, it is.
Now, what is the state government? The state government is nothing more and nothing less than what all the citizens of the state agree to do together. And so they literally want to do nothing together at the state level, if they're not going to tend to revenue.
What happens is, as we cut things at the state level, if we don't want to increase our revenues, which has been the trap. And Pete Mauck did a review of the state back in the 90s, and they said we had a structural problem with our budget. Our revenues do not grow as fast as our expenditures do. The things that states spend money on, a lot of salaries, things like paving roads, those sorts of things in your bucket of coming up with the price index. Those are the pricier things in the price index. So if our revenues grow, if the economy is growing at 2.5% and our revenues grow 2.5%, but the types of things that we spend money on, if you look at the cost to pave a road, the amount that's gone up over the last 20 years has gone up significantly more than what the GNP has gone up. So we have this structural problem. And the way that the state has been dealing with it over the last 20 years is we keep cutting our expenses, and many of the expenses are ones that flow to the state, to the municipalities. We used to pay for 30% of the pension cost for every municipality. We now pay 0. So that reduced the state's, it reduced the state's.
Yes, we remember that.
Yeah, it reduces the state's business.
And let me jump in, because despite that downshifting, in this town, there's been a consensus on the select board that we need to focus on the revenue side. And we have done that. We have done that through economic development.
Yeah.
We're trying to grow the commercial real estate tax base. And we've actually taken those downshifts, and we've taken all that you've thrown at us, and all the increases that are a natural part of this thing that we all agree to do together. And we've actually notched the tax rate on the town portion of the tax bill from 801 down to, I think we're currently at $7.77. So despite the downshifting from the state, by focusing a little bit on revenue, by putting some elbow grease on revenue, we've actually been able to notch the tax rate down slightly.
Well, you're going to get some more downshiftings in this budget.
Well, but just a second, because you're not focusing on what I'm saying.
I understand exactly what you're saying. You're looking at the revenue side.
This state has to focus on the revenue side at some point.
And right now in this budget, trying to explain how we're doing this budget.
But hear my point.
Yes,
You keep shifting off my point.
Oh, believe me,
This state has to focus on the revenue side.
So Dan, let me just real quickly say, do you have any ideas that you want to share with us that?
Yes, put money into education, because that's economic development. Put money into supporting new businesses in this state, because that'll increase both the BET and the BPT. So you've got to invest to grow the revenue side. Now, the political realities of this state are that every 2 years, there's a flip in the legislature. So it's very difficult to sustain direction.
And-
But the
and-
reality is that these problems will be resolved when this state decides to put some elbow grease on the revenue side.
And that is going to be a while. The makeup, because of redistricting that was done, especially with the Senate districts, for this decade, the Senate will remain in, it will be a Republican Senate.
You know,
Reality.
and I'm sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
Alexis, I apologize.
Yeah, no, I think.
You know,
You were
behind the
talking about
scenes, you know, you hear this discussion about revenues. The governor, prior to the casino vote, came to us a little late, but she came to us to discuss the fact that for her two campaigns, she talked about increasing revenues. Unfortunately, it was based upon one approach. And, but I think that we hear a lot of static that, you know, we do have to do something about revenues. Economic development being part of that, but that there probably will.
Well, the reason why I zero in on economic development, I think that's something that you could maybe get some bipartisan potential.
Yes, yes. But I don't, there's no one that would disagree with that, you know. I was sitting on a session on children's issues this morning, and it all came back to economic development. And there wasn't anyone in the room that was going to disagree with that. So,
I apologize a lot.
That's
No, I think it's because we're talking about revenues even among one party or the other. There's not agreement in sort of how to do that. And this is a very, I think we just need to keep figuring it out.
Dave Weber's, excuse me, so Dave Weber's been working with an organization that's been trying to find a way to increase revenues for the state for quite a while, if I understand correctly.
Lou was gonna probably ask about renewable energy.
Before you answer the revenue expenditure question, you really have to go back to Donna's question about what the values are. And isn't that where you really have to start? And then you move from there to say, okay, if these are our values, how are we gonna meet them?
I think that's absolutely true, Lou, and I think that's why I can say, you know, I'm pretty clear about the set of values that I have and probably that we have and maybe that we all share. And there are values behind this budget, but they're not the set of values that we might claim as serving the common good, perhaps. But there are a set of values behind this budget. They're just not values that we all agree on. I'm going to move on to the Renewable Energy Fund, but it is making me think that we should be flagging this because we should be the ones to keep having these conversations and keep pushing and pushing and pushing the state to do what we think we need to have done.
Just one last interject, I'm happy to show up wherever you need me to
Good.
talk about
Great.
more focus on revenues.
Good. Thank you. So Renewable Energy Fund, that money is a designated fund specifically from Reggie. Is it all from Reggie?
Yes.
Yes, it's all from Reggie, and it's for grants to municipalities and to low-income homeowners in order to invest in energy efficiency and in renewable resources, renewable energy sources. And that fund was rated in the House budget to the tune of $52 million across the biennium. That's frustrating. I have heard from a lot of people in Exeter that that's just a really poor lack of investment in our future.
And this is where, and that's, a lot of this would be money that would be used for, say, businesses in Exeter, for energy efficiencies, which will help improve their business and give them money to, potentially expand. But to be, this is where I want to say, to be completely honest, the Republicans are not the only ones that have done one-time things like this. In previous budgets, we raided the money from LCHIP.
What that is.
It's the land
Conservation investment.
conservation investment program. Anytime that you buy or sell property, you pay, when you pay your, the tax on it, you pay an extra $25, which goes into this fund. We rated that under Democratic control. Because the state has this structural deficit, we do one-time things in New Hampshire all the time. We sold the bridge, you know the bridge going over to Maine? The state sold the bridge to the turnpike system. And it was we were gonna get it from the because the turnpike system had money, okay? And the turnpike system's money can only be used for turnpike roads. We sold the bridge to the turnpike, and over a 20-year period, we were gonna get that money so that we were gonna have more money for our roads and bridges. Well, because we needed more money faster, we did that, we got all that money within a 5-year period. So in this budget here, there's no more money from the sale of the bridge. We don't have any more bridges to sell to the turnpike. So this one-time thing, I mean, we benefited a lot from the program done at the federal government through Obama during the recession. We got a lot of money, and we used it for one-time projects so that we knew it wasn't going to be money that was going to be coming in repeatedly. We used those for one-time projects. But both parties have taken money out of dedicated funds to balance budgets. I mean, Reggie is a particularly terrible one in my view, because it really helps our low-income people and our businesses. But to be completely honest, we have done the same thing we did it with LCHIP.
And it's legal.
And it's legal, and we can do whatever we want to with money.
It's, there's not, actually, apparently, there's not $50 million in that fund to be rated, there's only about $24 million. So the Senate would have to fix that anyway. But that's a new update to the budget. So I think, Patty already mentioned this, the collective I'm going to jump to the collective bargaining agreement. The House changed that agreement after the contract was done, so I don't know what the Senate will decide to do about that. And then the House also put in the budget to increase the healthcare premium that retired state employees would pay, as one way to, what would you call that, a revenue source?
Extortion.
Can I say one thing, one value that is shown in this budget, and I hear this in my committee over and over, which is that I have a high value in us putting money in into the budget that can be matched by federal money. There's a lot of money on the table in a lot of different areas, including agriculture, but to be matched, you know, at the federal level, and that is not a shared value across the aisle. That there is, even though it's money there to be matched, there is not a desire from everyone to get that money here.
Has anybody quantified that?
$67 million.
Well, and I think the other thing, Patty, you might speak to is the fact that that federal money is money we as New Hampshire residents paid into the federal government. And where do we stand?
We are there, I don't remember exactly what our ranking is, but it's very low on the amount of money that we as citizens and businesses pay for federal income tax versus what we get back. We are one of the lowest
in terms of getting
money back from the state. And there was a concerted effort to look at programs that give us federal dollars to be able to reduce those federal dollars.
Is it not a shared value that being
Right.
50th in one of the states in per capita expenditure in higher education? Is it bad that is that not a shared value?
I know that it's not a shared value. I'm looking at, I was at the UNH today, and the amount of money that Massachusetts and Connecticut and New York right now, especially Massachusetts and Connecticut, they are putting a tremendous amount of money into their higher education programs. Expanding their STEM programs. They're building for the next generation. Because in order to build businesses, you have to have the educated workforce. So they are investing in their future.
Can we just clarify, STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math?
Yes. And we are not doing that. The head of the graduate program, Peter Paul School, told me that they've been seeing each year for the last several years fewer and fewer New Hampshire students that are applying for the graduate program. And also those that are accepted, less that are coming, they're going someplace else. Because the cost of a graduate program at UNH and the Peter Paul is, other than Dartmouth, it's the highest in the state. And people can get those graduate degrees at other state universities and other private colleges at a less expensive, even though we've got a tremendous program. If you haven't been up to the new Peter Paul School, you really need to go up and tour it. I was just so impressed today at the Holloway competition for the types of businesses that these students are doing. But we are not doing that investment. I do not believe it's a shared, there are, and it's not by everybody on the other side of the aisle. I mean, there are some that really would like to invest in the university, but it's just, it's not happening.
So I'm going to just very briefly talk about downshifting. We have our select persons here with us tonight. They want to hear about what they might be facing. The meals and rooms tax that we pay, 9%, is it something like that? 9.5%? 9. A portion of that is supposed to go back to the municipalities. This budget has said that the state's going to retain more of that. They're not going to share quite as much. Something on the order of about $10 million is not going to come to the to our municipalities.
Out of the total of how much there?
I don't know what the total is.
I don't have the numbers with me. We don't share with the municipalities what we say we're going to. In law, it says that 40% of all the rooms and meals is supposed to be distributed back to the municipalities, and it's distributed to municipalities based upon their population. We currently only distribute about 25% of it, and we're going to cut that back further. So we are not meeting our statutory requirements now, and we're going, in this budget, in all of this, we don't know what will come out of the Senate budget, but in this budget, those are being cut back.
Just to be clear, when we say meals and rooms tax, we're talking about New Hampshire's only example of the sales tax, correct?
Yeah.
Correct,
That's
yes.
right. That's right. So, and education is a very much of a moving target, I gather. I had a little conversation this afternoon, and no one really seems to know, but maybe Patty has some additional information. There are kind of two areas, though, that one needs to keep their eye on. One is what's called the adequacy aid that comes to communities, which is in large part based upon a formula. Some communities seem to get more than their fair share because of the way in which this program's been handled. Some get less. It happens, according to information that we have, that Exeter is right on target for the adequacy funding. So I'm not going to go into detail on that. If people have questions, Patty is an expert on that and can fill you in. Then there's this other category of catastrophic aid, or catastrophic funding, and that may be more of an issue for us here. And I'm not quite sure. There was a lot of talk as we were passing the budget that the catastrophic aid was going to go up. And then there was a lot of manipulation at the last minute, and I don't even know.
I think in this budget, they are 100% funding catastrophic aid. We have not 100% funded catastrophic aid for several years. What catastrophic aid is if there is a student in one of the Exeter schools, and I forgot the exact percentages, but if the average cost of educating a child is $12,000. If their special ed services are up to 3 times that amount, the school has to pay 100% of it. If it's between 3 and like 7 or 8 times, the state picks up 50%. And if it's above a certain amount, when I was on school board, that number was around 112,000 or something, 110,000. Anything over above 110,000, the state picks up 100% of it. The state reimburses the towns for that a year lag. So the schools have to pay for it 100%, and then they get the money back in the next biennium for the amounts that were either in that period where they shared it or the amounts above. And that's been an area over the last 10 years that sometimes it's been 100% funded, and other times it's been cut back. It's been cut back almost as much as 25%. I think this budget, in the final analysis, 100% funded catastrophic aid.
Okay. I thought we were going to have some people from the school board here, but that may may have been concerned about that. Nursing home support is another area of where we'll experience some downshifting. If you'll look under county nursing home, partway down, about 1/3 of the way down, that long-term care county participation. On your tax bill, your property tax bill, you notice there is an item there which says county, and it's about 4% of the total bill. This is money that we have to pay in to the state, essentially, to pay for the services for long-term care, which is in large part nursing home care. And then you'll notice that that has gone up, and the House budget brought it up considerably. So it is of concern. I know it's just another piece of downshifting that gradually moves our property taxes higher and higher.
And it
I'm
can only...
confused about that, Skip.
Pardon?
If you're appropriating more money for county participation, how is that downshifting? I'm just a little confused about that.
No, they're not this is not an appropriation. This particular spreadsheet is kind of a combination of things. Yeah, it's some of this.
There's something wrong with those numbers.
It's indicating an increase in the county's.
Yeah, it's what we're having, what the county share has to pay in this, on that particular.
So in this case, it's not an expenditure on the state budget?
No, it's what we have to pay in.
That's why it says county share.
That's right, the county share. And then we've heard about the issue of roads and bridges, that gradually you're getting less and less in block grants to the municipalities for bridge and road repairs. I believe that the string bridge repairs that are occurring this summer are part of that block grant process. Those are shrinking and shrinking, so again, these repairs are coming back to the municipalities. So all of this is of concern. I did invite Senator Prescott to come this evening. He is not here. I did have a conversation with him about a week ago in which he said that the Senate was going to do a good job with their budget, that they would that we could expect at the minimum level funding from the current biennium. We could expect that the Renewable Energy Fund will be restored. But we know that he's only one of 24, and there will be other forces, and so it's really important that we get some of these messages to him as well. Yes, Donna?
Did he indicate how that was going to be accomplished? Because he is always on record in the public as saying he will never vote for an increase in fees and taxes.
There will be more revenue.
Yes.
So
I mean,
it's
to
just
be-
the confidence of the increased revenue that
The
it's
increased revenues, and to begin with, they don't have a, $35 to $50 million hole to fill, because it looks like we will end this biennium pretty much at level, is what it was looking at, the revenue focus. So, and revenues came in much better over the last few months than they were expecting. So using that as a base, I mean, meals and rooms is the thing that just, it keeps going up. We've done very, very well in rooms and meals. So they will have more revenue. I do not expect to see any revenue increases in the Senate budget. So they will have more revenues because our revenues are increasing, but I do not expect to see any new sources of revenue in the Senate budget. I mean, one thing to realize here in New Hampshire, which is very different than every other state, if you look at all of our expenditures, both at the municipal and the state level, we fund 65% of all appropriations with property taxes. 65% of every dollar that's spent in municipal and state level is from property taxes.
There's the category we rank first in.
That is the category we rank first. And we rank first by quite a bit. The next closest is New Jersey at 48%. And, and theirs is considered extraordinarily high. But we fund this state with property taxes. And no other state does it to, the extent that we do. And as we push things down, and the state, uses money that it was going to send to the state municipalities. I mean, if you're at Hampton Beach, they're looking at taking 50% of the state patrols, not funding 50% of the state patrol at Hampton. So that's one community that's going to have to deal with a 50% increase in an expenditure. So realistically, whatever the Senate showed us today, and we will see more of that over the next month and a half, it will look better because there are more revenues. The House revenues were too low.
Do you expect the Senate to respect the settlements that were agreed to in court?
I do.
But essentially, we have to, or we're going to dig ourselves into an even deeper hole on those lawsuits.
I don't know about the state employees, because the governor, in effect, the executive branch negotiates those contracts, and then it's up to the House and the Senate, in effect, to fund them. So the fact that that in this budget, they were not funding those raises, contractually, the House and Senate can do that. So even though the governor has signed the budget.
Wait a second, just to clarify, ratification happens at the legislative level?
Yeah.
That's insane.
Ron, you had a question?
I'm curious whether Governor Hassan has come out yet in terms of the likelihood of her vetoing the budget and what the likelihood of that is, and whether it makes any sense to do that?
She hasn't seen it yet. She hasn't seen the budget that's coming out of the Senate, and hasn't seen whatever the final budget is going to be. So I don't think, she has not let, she's not tipped her hand as to whether she would.
Is there any logic in doing that, in vetoing the budget?
The only logic, really is if you're trying to get other forms of revenue in there. I mean, she can object to how how the House and Senate together have said what they're going to fund, what the funding priorities are. But, it's sources of revenue. I mean, she did have some additional sources of revenue in the budget, and those sources of revenue are not going to happen. I mean, there is not going to be an increase in the cigarette tax, even though it makes complete sense. We would still be significant. I mean, Massachusetts just raised theirs $1 last year, and they were already quite a bit ahead of us. So we would still get those cross-border sales. But I would not want to speak for the governor, and like I said, she hasn't seen,
She hasn't said anything yet.
she hasn't, but
The only thing.
she hasn't seen it yet.
The only thing that she has said is that she really wants to see the Medicaid expansion
Yes.
continued. And we're hearing from the Senate that they're feeling that will happen in their budget when it comes back
Oh,
to
so
us.
it will continue
Well,
in their budget.
but, yes.
She fought hard for it last year and got it.
And even if it's not in the budget, that doesn't mean that it won't happen.
Really?
Yes, because we can do a separate bill on continuing it. You know, you can get 1 year into the budget and see how the revenues are coming in. And then we could do a separate bill to keep expanded Medicaid in 2017.
Depending on the politics of that year.
Well, it's the politics within this two-year period, because it's this biennium that needs to address it.
And Medicaid expansion only passed when it passed in a compromise which said in the bill that if the revenues were not there in this budget, that it would go away.
Yeah, the only way.
That was a
yeah.
political
It was
compromise
a-
that was made with the governor in order to even get the expansion to begin
Yes.
with.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Well, we want to wind up about this point. Were there any of these issues that you really feel we've not covered? Anything that you really feel you need to hear more about in regard to these issues?
Dan,
that
I
you
can
brought
talk to, I'll talk to you about
You're gonna
utility
talk
poles.
one-on-one so we don't put to sleep the
Yes.
whole night.
Anything else? Well, this is great. As we've indicated, getting in touch with Senator Prescott is important about the things that are most important to you in this budget. And I'm sure that all of us also want to hear. So as we move through this, don't hesitate to be in touch with us through email or phone calls or whatever. I was surprised how few contacts I had around budget issues. When the casino, there was a lot of activity there, a lot of communication around the casinos. But the budget usually is just such an overwhelming kind of thing. You just don't know kind of what to do. But we should hear what your priorities are and where we should put our energies. And I'm glad to hear that. Tom?
Probably terribly naive about this, but I mean, these kinds of meetings are a very good start, but I just kind of have the feeling that you're fighting the wrong fight when you're talking about the individual budget lines, when, you know, it's clear that philosophically the opposing side is just interested in contracting, in making government smaller, and is not interested in raising revenue. So you're fighting the wrong fight in trying to reinstitute, you know, some level of funding. If the starting point is that they're just not interested in raising the revenue. You've got to somehow find a way to get some of these really straightforward messages out, such as we are ranked 50th in the nation for property, you know, first in the nation for rate of property tax, and 50th in the nation for, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
It's pretty simple messages such as that, that are just not really well understood by the average citizen in this state. It's not reported well, and it's not being said well.
First I've heard it.
Well, I think it's important, yes, I think we have to craft some messages around our values
It comes back to the statement about values and principles, and I think that's the only way this is going to get accomplished.
Can I respond to that real quickly? So a couple things. I do feel like we're fighting the only fight that we can win right now, this minute. But I want to throw that back at all of you. Like, I think in order to make some headway on those larger philosophical issues, we have to keep fighting the much larger battle, and we have to keep getting the message out. We have to keep, all of us, trying to get what we know in the media, trying to organize, trying to learn from each other what these things are, like what gets people, what clicks the switch in people to say, we're not doing what we should be doing, or I can't believe that we're 50th for this, or we're first for this, or, you know, how can we get that message out? Just everybody kind of creatively thinking, who can we get to rally around this and how? And if we all do sort of our part, you know, that pushes it forward a little bit more and a little bit more, and it's easier on the seacoast than it is in other places in the state, for sure. But I hear you, and I think that's the long.
And we are in a bit of a
ball.
bubble here in Exeter, which also creates a little bit of a problem for us. But we try with our colleagues as we sit in Representatives Hall and try and exert a little influence over others.
I guess the other part of what I was trying to relate is there's some fairly, I mean, there's some facts out there that can be fairly easily stated, and some of them have been stated here tonight, that just need to become more common knowledge. I mean, there are structural imbalances in these budgets that can be quantified and can be talked about, and there are rankings in terms of, you know, how much we pay for certain things and how little we pay for other things that are fairly easily stated that need to become common knowledge in this state and are not.
If I could just offer a thank you to all of you. Last fall, when I spent every Sunday and Monday, my off days, canvassing for your candidacies, amongst others, in Exeter and Stratham, I had a vision of having a group of representatives, and I was hoping a senator. It didn't come to pass, but thank you for running down it. I had a vision of this type of thing, and to have this actually happen, to have the group of you put this together, it's a completion of that vision, I think, so thank you for doing this.
It's the beginning of a vision.
Thank you very much for coming.